For heaven's sake, Mike, can't you just make a decision? I snapped, my patience wearing thin as I juggled a phone call with my biggest client and my husband's indecisiveness over dinner plans. Mike's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, Laura. I just want to make sure everyone's happy. I ended the call and turned to face him, exasperation etched on my face. It's just dinner, not world peace. Pick something. Before Mike could respond, our son Josh trudged into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Hey, Mom, Dad, what's for dinner? Your father hasn't decided yet, I said, shooting Mike a pointed look. Josh shrugged. Whatever's fine. I've got a ton of homework anyway. I felt a pang of guilt. At 16, Josh shouldered more responsibility than most kids his age. How about I whip up some spaghetti? Quick and easy. Sounds great, Mom, Josh said, already heading upstairs. Mike nodded, relief washing over his face. That works for me, too. As I started gathering ingredients, the phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID and groaned. It's your mother. Mike's eyes widened. Oh, I forgot to tell you, she wants to talk to us about something important. I raised an eyebrow. Important enough to interrupt dinner prep? Maybe we should put her on speaker, Mike suggested timidly. Sighing, I answered the call and hit the speaker button. Hello, Miriam. Laura, dear. Miriam's saccharine voice filled the kitchen. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Not at all, I lied, catching Mike's grateful smile. What can we do for you? Well, Miriam began, her tone shifting to one of practiced vulnerability, I've been thinking a lot about my living situation. This big house is just too much for me to manage on my own. I froze, a sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew where this was going. Mom, Mike chimed in, are you saying you want to move? Oh, Mikey, Miriam cooed. I knew you'd understand. I was hoping. Well, I was wondering if I could come stay with you and Laura for a while. The wooden spoon I'd been holding clattered to the floor. Mike looked at me, his eyes pleading. Miriam, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, that's quite a big decision. We'd need to discuss it as a family. Of course, dear, Miriam replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I wouldn't want to impose. It's just that I'm not getting any younger, and I miss seeing my Mikey and Josh every day. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that she'd never shown much interest in Josh before. Mike, emboldened by his mother's words, spoke up. Mom, why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? We can talk about it then. What a lovely idea, Miriam exclaimed. I'll bring dessert. Laura, dear, I hope you don't mind. Not at all, I managed, shooting Mike a look that clearly said we'd be discussing this later. After ending the call, I turned to Mike. You can't be serious about this. Laura, she's my mother, Mike pleaded. She needs us. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. Mike, your mother has never approved of me. How do you think having her here will affect our family? It'll be fine, Mike insisted, his voice lacking conviction. Maybe it'll give her a chance to see how great you are. I laughed bitterly. After 20 years of marriage, she suddenly decides to give me a chance. Please, Laura, Mike begged. Just think about it. As I turned back to the stove, my mind raced. How had my well-ordered life suddenly spiraled into chaos? I'd always prided myself on being able to handle anything, but the thought of Miriam living under our roof sent shivers down my spine. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test the very foundations of our family. As I stirred the spaghetti sauce, I couldn't shake the feeling that agreeing to this dinner tomorrow night might be the biggest mistake of my life. I never thought I'd dread coming home, but as I pulled into the driveway, my stomach churned. It had been 3 weeks since Miriam moved in, and our once peaceful house now felt like a war zone. As I stepped inside, Miriam's shrill voice pierced the air. Mikey, dear, where are my reading glasses? I'm not sure, Mom, Mike replied, his voice strained. Did you check the kitchen counter? I took a deep breath and plastered on a smile. Hello, everyone. I'm home. Miriam appeared in the hallway, her eyes narrowing. Oh, Laura, you're later than usual. I had to start dinner without you. I'm sorry, Miriam. Work was hectic today, I explained, trying to keep my tone neutral. She sniffed disapprovingly. Well, a wife should be home to cook for her family. In my day— Mom, please, Mike interrupted, shooting me an apologetic look. Laura works hard for us. I gave him a grateful nod, but Miriam wasn't finished. I'm just saying, Mikey, that a woman's place is wherever she chooses it to be. I cut in, my patience wearing thin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to change before dinner. As I headed upstairs, I heard Miriam mutter, "No respect for her elders." Honestly, Mikey, I don't know how you put up with it. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to turn around and give her a piece of my mind. Instead, I knocked on Josh's door. "Come in," he called. I found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by textbooks. "Hey, sweetie, how's the studying going?" Josh sighed, rubbing his eyes. "It's okay, Mom. Just a lot of pressure, you know?" I sat on the edge of his bed. "I know, honey, but remember, your mental health is important too. Maybe you should take a break?" "I can't," he said, his voice tight. "Grandma Miriam says I need to study harder if I want to get into a good college." My blood boiled. "Josh, listen to me. You're doing great, and pushing yourself too hard isn't healthy. Grandma Miriam doesn't—" "Doesn't what, Laura?" Miriam's voice came from the doorway, making us both jump. "Doesn't want the best for her grandson?" I stood up, facing her. "Miriam, we need to talk about this. You can't keep—" "Dinner's ready," Mike called from downstairs, inadvertently diffusing the situation. Miriam smirked. "We'll continue this later, dear. Come along, Josh. You need a good meal to fuel that brilliant mind of yours." As they left, I caught Josh's eye. He looked torn, and my heart ached for him. Dinner was a tense affair. Miriam dominated the conversation, praising Mike's childhood achievements and not so subtly comparing them to Josh's. "You know, Mikey was top of his class in math," she boasted. "Josh, dear, how are your math grades?" Josh squirmed in his seat. "They're okay, Grandma." "Just okay?" Miriam skied. "Well, I'm sure if your mother spent more time at home—" "That's enough," I snapped, slamming my fork down. "Miriam, I've had it with your constant criticism. This is my home, and I won't have you undermining me or pressuring Josh." The table fell silent. Mike looked between us, his face pale. "Laura, Mom, please." "No, Mike," I said, standing up. "It's time we addressed this. Miriam, when you moved in, we agreed you'd respect our parenting decisions, but you've done nothing but criticize and interfere." Miriam's eyes flashed. "Well, someone has to look out for this family's best interests. Clearly, you're too busy with your career to do so." "Mom," Mike exclaimed, finally finding his voice. "That's not fair. Laura's an amazing mother and wife." I felt a surge of affection for Mike, but it was quickly doused by Miriam's next words. "Oh, Mikey," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You've always been too soft. It's clear who wears the pants in this family. I just hope poor Josh doesn't suffer for it." As Josh pushed back from the table and fled upstairs, I realized something had to change. This couldn't go on. But as I looked at Mike's conflicted face, I wondered if he'd ever be strong enough to stand up to his mother. Little did I know this dinner confrontation was just the beginning of a storm that would tear our family apart. The next morning, I woke to the sound of hushed voices downstairs. Creeping to the top of the stairs, I listened, my heart sinking with each word. "Mom, I don't know what to do," Mike whispered. "Laura's been so stressed lately." Miriam's voice dripped with false concern. "Oh, Mikey, I've been thinking, maybe it's time Laura took a step back from her job. For the sake of the family, of course." I gripped the banister, my knuckles turning white. How dare she? "I don't know, Mom," Mike replied, uncertainty clear in his voice. "Laura loves her job." "But does she love it more than her family?" Miriam pressed. "Josh's grades are slipping, and you're always so tense. A wife's place is in the home, Mikey. You know that." I'd heard enough. Storming down the stairs, I confronted them in the kitchen. "Is that what you really think, Miriam, that I should give up my career?" Mike jumped, spilling his coffee. "Laura, we were just talking about me behind my back." I finished for him. "I heard everything." Miriam had the audacity to look offended. "Laura, dear, we're just concerned about the family's well-being." "No," I snapped. "You're concerned about controlling everyone's lives. This ends now." Just then, Josh trudged into the kitchen, dark circles under his eyes. "What's going on?" "Nothing, sweetie," I said, trying to soften my tone. "How did you sleep?" "Not great," he mumbled. "I was up late studying for my calculus test." Miriam pounced on the opportunity. "See, if you were home more, Laura, you could help Josh with his studies." "That's it," I exploded. "Miriam, I want you out of this house. Today." The kitchen fell silent. Mike looked between us, panic in his eyes. "Laura, please. Mom didn't mean—" "Oh, I meant every word," Miriam interrupted, her mask of politeness finally slipping. "Someone needs to look out for this family's best interests, and clearly it's not you, Laura." Josh's eyes widened. Grandma, that's not fair. Mom works hard for us. Stay out of this, Josh, Mike said, his voice strained. Laura, can we talk about this privately? I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. No, Mike. I'm done talking. Either Miriam leaves or I do. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mike looked torn, his gaze darting between his mother and me. Mikey, Miriam said softly, you can't let her do this. I'm your mother. I held my breath, waiting for Mike to stand up for our family, for me. But as the seconds ticked by, his silence spoke volumes. I see, I whispered, my heart breaking. Josh, go pack a bag. We're leaving. What? Josh exclaimed. Mom? No. Mike finally found his voice. Laura, please, we can work this out. But I was already heading upstairs, Josh reluctantly following. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, my mind raced. Where would we go? What would this mean for our family? Miriam's voice carried up the stairs. Mikey, you can't let them leave. What about my grandson? That was the last straw. I marched back downstairs, suitcase in hand. Your grandson? Josh is my son, Miriam, and I won't let you poison him with your outdated sexist views. Mike stepped between us. Laura, Mom, please. Can't we talk about this calmly? There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice ice cold. You've made your choice, Mike. You chose your mother over your wife and son. As Josh and I headed for the door, Miriam called out, You'll regret this, Laura. You're tearing this family apart. I turned back, meeting her gaze. No, Miriam. You did that the moment you moved in. With that, Josh and I walked out, leaving behind a stunned Mike and a fuming Miriam. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Mike in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway looking lost. Mom, Josh said quietly, what happens now? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, fighting back tears. I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out together. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of my strength and resolve. 3 days after our dramatic exit, I found myself pacing the floor of Jane's guest room. My best friend had graciously offered us a place to stay while I figured out our next move. Laura, sit down before you wear a hole in my carpet, Jane said, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. I sank onto the bed, my hands shaking. I'm sorry, Jane. I can't believe this is happening. She sat beside me, her lawyer face on. Have you heard from Mike? He's called a dozen times, I sighed. I haven't answered. Maybe you should, Jane suggested gently, at least to discuss Josh's situation. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Mike's face flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Laura? Mike's voice was strained. Please, can we talk? I took a deep breath. Fine. Talk. Mom's gone too far this time, he said. I've asked her to leave. My heart skipped a beat. You have? Yes, he replied. I realize now how much damage she's caused. Please, come home. We can work this out. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. But then I remembered all the times Mike had failed to stand up for me, for us. I don't know, Mike, I said cautiously. A lot has happened. I know, he pleaded. But I love you, Laura. We can fix this. Before I could respond, I heard Miriam's voice in the background. Mikey? Who are you talking to? My blood ran cold. Mike, is your mother still there? His hesitation was all the answer I needed. You lied to me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Laura, wait. I hung up, my hands trembling with rage. Jane looked at me, concern etched on her face. What happened? I relayed the conversation, my anger building with each word. He lied, Jane. He said Miriam was gone, but she's still there. Jane's expression hardened. Laura, I think it's time we discussed your options, legally speaking. As she outlined potential scenarios, divorce, custody arrangements, property division, my mind whirled. Was this really the end of my marriage? A soft knock interrupted us. Josh peeked in, his eyes red-rimmed. Mom, can I talk to you? Jane excused herself, leaving us alone. Josh sat beside me, looking more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. Mom, I heard you talking to Dad, he said quietly. Are you guys getting divorced? My heart broke. Oh, honey, I don't know yet. Your dad and I have a lot to work through. Josh nodded, then surprised me with his next words. I think maybe you should. What? I gasped. Ever since Grandma moved in, everything's been awful, he continued. Dad never stands up for us, and you're always so sad, Mom. I hate seeing you like this. Tears welled in my eyes as I pulled him into a hug. I'm so sorry, Josh. I never wanted you to be caught in the middle of this. As we held each other, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Miriam. Laura, This childish behavior needs to stop. You're hurting Mikey and destroying this family. If you truly love your son, you'll come home and be the wife and mother you're supposed to be." Rage boiled inside me. How dare she? After everything she'd done, she still had the audacity to lecture me? In that moment, something snapped. I realized I was done being the peacekeeper, done sacrificing my happiness for a family that didn't appreciate me. I looked at Josh, seeing the strength and maturity in his eyes. "You're right, honey. Things can't go on like this." Taking a deep breath, I made a decision that would change our lives forever. It's time to end this, once and for all. As I stood up, determination coursing through me, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Miriam had no idea what she was in for. This time, I wouldn't back down. This time, I would fight for myself, for Josh, and for the life we deserved. Little did Miriam know, she had just awakened a force she couldn't reckon with. The gloves were off, and I was ready for war. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Jane had helped me draft a plan of action, and I was ready to reclaim my life. But first, I needed to face Mike and Miriam one last time. As Josh and I pulled into our driveway, my resolve wavered. This house held so many memories, both good and bad. Taking a deep breath, I turned to my son. "You don't have to come in if you don't want to," I said softly. Josh shook his head. "No, Mom, I'm with you." His words gave me strength. We walked to the front door, and I used my key for what I knew would be the last time. The moment we stepped inside, Miriam's voice rang out. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence. Mike appeared from the living room, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Laura, Josh, thank God you're home." "We're not staying," I said firmly. "We're here to collect our things." Miriam scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. This tantrum has gone on long enough." I ignored her, focusing on Mike. "I've made my decision, Mike. I want a divorce." The color drained from his face. "Laura, please, we can work this out." "Can we?" I challenged, because from where I'm standing, nothing's changed. Your mother's still here, still controlling our lives. Miriam stepped between us. "Now see here, young lady, you can't just throw away 20 years of marriage because you're feeling a little unappreciated." Something inside me snapped. "A little unappreciated? You've done nothing but undermine and belittle me since the day you moved in. And you," I turned to Mike, "you've let her do it, every single time." Mike reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Laura, I love you. Please don't do this." "If you loved me," I said, my voice breaking, "you would have stood up for me, for us." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jane. "Emergency at the office. Need you ASAP." I looked at Mike and Miriam, suddenly realizing how small they seemed, how insignificant their drama was compared to the life I'd built for myself. "I have to go," I said. "Work emergency. Josh, can you start packing your things?" Miriam's eyes flashed. "Work? You're choosing work over your family? I always knew you were selfish, but that's enough." To everyone's surprise, it was Josh who spoke up. "Grandma, you don't get to talk to Mom like that, not anymore." Pride swelled in my chest as Josh stood tall, facing down his grandmother. Mike looked between us, confusion and hurt etched on his face. "Josh, buddy, what are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying I'm going with Mom," Josh replied. "I'm tired of the fighting, of walking on eggshells in my own home. Mom's the only one who's ever put me first." Miriam gasped dramatically. "Mikey, are you going to let them leave? They're tearing this family apart." As Mike hesitated, torn between his mother and his family, my phone buzzed again. Jane's message flashed on the screen. "Laura, it's about the house. You need to see this now." A chill ran down my spine. What could be so urgent? I looked at Mike, seeing the conflict in his eyes. For a moment, I almost wavered, but then I remembered all the times he'd chosen his mother over me, over our family. "Josh, change of plans. We need to go to Aunt Jane's office right away," I said, my voice steady. "Mike, we'll be back for our things later. Have them ready." As we walked out the door, I heard Miriam's shrill voice. "Mikey, do something!" But Mike remained silent, and that silence spoke volumes. In the car, Josh looked at me, worry creasing his brow. "Mom, what's going on?" I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. "I don't know, honey, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." As we drove towards Jane's office, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change dramatically. Little did I know, the bombshell waiting for us would alter the course of our future forever. Jane's office was a flurry of activity when Josh and I arrived. She ushered us into her private room, her face grim. "Laura, I'm glad you're here," she said, closing the door. "We've uncovered something troubling." My heart raced. "What is it, Jane?" She pulled out a thick file. "I've been looking into your financials, preparing for the divorce proceedings. Laura, there are some significant discrepancies." As Jane explained, my world tilted on its axis. Apparently, large sums of money had been systematically withdrawn from our joint accounts over the past year. Money I knew nothing about. "How much?" I whispered, dreading the answer. Jane's voice was soft but firm. "Nearly $500,000, Laura." The room spun. I gripped the edge of her desk, trying to steady myself. That's impossible. I would have noticed." "Mom?" Josh's voice sounded far away. "What does this mean?" I turned to my son, seeing the fear in his eyes. "I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out." Jane continued, her lawyer mode in full swing. "There's more. The withdrawals coincide with Miriam's move-in date, and they've been transferred to an offshore account." The pieces started falling into place. Miriam's sudden interest in living with us, her constant undermining, her attempts to drive a wedge between Mike and me. It had all been a calculated plan. "She's been stealing from us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And Mike, he must have known." Josh stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "How could Dad do this to us?" I pulled him into a hug, my mind racing. "I don't know, sweetie, but we're going to find out." Just then, my phone buzzed, a text from Mike. "On our way to Uncle Bob's funeral. Why aren't you answering my calls? We need to talk." A cold determination settled over me. This was my chance. "Jane," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "what are my options?" She leaned forward, all business. "We can file for an emergency injunction to freeze the accounts, and with this evidence, we have a strong case for divorce on grounds of financial infidelity." I nodded, a plan forming. "Do it, and I need one more thing." 20 minutes later, Josh and I were back home. Mike and Miriam would be gone for hours, giving us the time we needed. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Josh asked as we packed our essentials. I paused, looking around the home we'd built together. "No, honey, but I'm sure we can't stay here anymore." As we worked, I drafted a text to Mike. "I know about the money. Don't bother coming home. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." My finger hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. With a deep breath, I pressed send. Moments later, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Mike. I ignored them all. As Josh and I loaded the last of our things into the car, I took one final look at the house. So many memories, good and bad. But it wasn't home anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. "Ready?" I asked Josh. He nodded, a mix of sadness and determination in his eyes. "Ready, Mom." We drove away, leaving behind the life we'd known. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Miriam and Mike had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, that I'd roll over and accept their betrayal. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As we pulled into the driveway of our new apartment, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Miriam. "You ungrateful witch! How dare you accuse us of stealing? You'll regret this, Laura. Mark my words." I smiled grimly, feeling a strange sense of calm. The battle lines were drawn. Miriam wanted a war? Fine, she was about to find out just how formidable an opponent I could be. Little did she know I had one more ace up my sleeve. And when I played it, their whole world would come crashing down. The morning after we moved into our new apartment, my phone exploded with notifications. Mike and Miriam had returned from the funeral, and all hell had broken loose. "Laura, open this door right now." Mike's voice boomed through the intercom. I glanced at Josh, who was pale but resolute. "Should we let them up, Mom?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "No, honey, we're doing this on our terms now." I pressed the intercom button. "Mike, I told you, it's over. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Lawyer?" Miriam's shrill voice cut in. "You ungrateful hussy. After everything we've done for you." I laughed bitterly. "Everything you've done? You mean stealing $500,000 from us?" There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Mike's voice suddenly small. "Laura, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I replied, my voice ice cold. "I know about the offshore account, Mike. I know about everything." More pounding on the lobby door. "You can't keep my grandson from me," Miriam screeched. Josh stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "I'm not your property, Grandma. I chose to come with Mom." Pride swelled in my chest, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Jane. "Laura, turn on the news, now." With shaking hands I flipped on the TV. My jaw dropped as I saw Mike's face plastered across the screen, the headline screaming, "Local businessman implicated in major embezzlement scheme." "Oh my God," I whispered. Josh's eyes widened. "Mom, what's happening?" Before I could answer, there was a commotion downstairs. Through the window, I saw police cars pulling up, officers rushing towards Mike and Miriam. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Mike. "What have you done?" I stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part ached for the man I'd once loved. "Mom?" Josh's voice pulled me back. "Did you do this?" I turned to my son, seeing the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "No, honey, I didn't know about the police, but I did tell Jane to look into Dad's finances." Josh nodded slowly, processing. "So what happens now?" As if in answer, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find two stern-faced detectives. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to ask you some questions about your husband's financial activities." For the next 2 hours, Josh and I were interrogated separately. They wanted to know if I was involved, if I had benefited from the embezzled funds. By the time they left, I felt drained and hollow. I found Josh sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. The news was still covering the story, now showing footage of Mike and Miriam being led away in handcuffs. "Oh, Josh," I said, pulling him into a hug. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far." He clung to me, his body shaking with silent sobs. "It's not your fault, Mom. They did this, not you." As we sat there, holding each other, my phone buzzed once more. It was Jane. "Laura, I've got more news. The house, it's not just in your name. It's part of a trust set up by Mike's late father for Josh." I gasped. "What?" "Miriam and Mike have been trying to break the trust for months. That's where the money was going. They were paying off judges, trying to get control of Josh's inheritance." The pieces fell into place. Miriam's obsession with Josh, her constant criticism of my parenting, it had never been about family. It had always been about money. As the reality of our situation sank in, I realized this was far from over. We'd won this battle, but the war was just beginning. And as I held my son, watching our old life crumble on the TV screen, I knew one thing for certain. I would fight with everything I had to protect Josh and the future that was rightfully his. Miriam and Mike had underestimated me for the last time. Now, they were about to learn just how fierce a mother's love could be. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took my seat beside Jane. Across the aisle, Mike sat with his lawyer, looking haggard and defeated. Miriam was conspicuously absent, having been denied bail due to flight risk. As the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. This was it, the culmination of months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and emotional turmoil. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, surveyed the courtroom. "We're here to finalize the divorce proceedings of Laura and Michael Thompson, as well as to address the matter of Joshua Thompson's trust fund. Let's begin." For the next hour, lawyers presented arguments, financial records were scrutinized, and witnesses were called. Through it all, I kept my eyes fixed on Josh, who sat in the gallery, his face a mask of determination. Finally, the judge cleared her throat. "Having reviewed all the evidence, I'm ready to make my ruling." My heart pounded as she continued. "First, regarding the divorce. Given Mr. Thompson's financial misconduct and the evidence of emotional abuse, I'm granting the divorce in favor of Mrs. Thompson." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "As for the matter of Joshua Thompson's trust fund," the judge continued, "I find the attempts by Mr. Thompson and his mother, Miriam Thompson, to illegally access these funds to be reprehensible." Mike's head dropped into his hands. "The trust will remain intact, with Mrs. Laura Thompson appointed as sole trustee until Joshua reaches the age of 25. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. We'd won. It was over, but as I turned to smile at Josh, the courtroom doors burst open. Miriam, somehow out on bail, stormed in. "This is an outrage," she screeched. "You can't do this to my family." The judge banged her gavel. "Mrs. Thompson Sr., you are out of order. Bailiff, remove her immediately." As the bailiff approached, Miriam's eyes locked on mine. In that moment, I saw the full extent of her hatred and desperation. "You!" she spat. "You've ruined everything." Before anyone could react, she lunged at me, her hands clawing at my face. I stumbled backward, shocked by the ferocity of her attack. "Mom!" Josh yelled, rushing forward. In the chaos that followed, I heard Mike's voice rise above the din. "Mother, stop! It's over!" The bailiff finally restrained Miriam, who continued to shriek and struggle. As they dragged her away, I saw something I never expected. Mike was crying. Our eyes met across the courtroom. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I'd once loved, lost, broken, and finally free from his mother's control. "I'm sorry, Laura," he mouthed before being led away by his lawyer. As the courtroom settled, the judge called for order. "In light of this incident, I'm adding a restraining order against Miriam Thompson. She is to have no contact with Laura or Joshua Thompson." With a final bang of her gavel, it was truly over. Outside the courthouse, Josh hugged me tight. "We did it, Mom. We're free." I held him close, marveling at his strength. "Yes, we are, honey. We're free." Jane approached, a wide smile on her face. "Congratulations, Laura. You were amazing in there." I shook my head. "We were amazing. I couldn't have done this without you, Jane." As we walked away from the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. That night, as Josh and I sat in our new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I realized something profound. "You know, Josh," I said, "for years I thought I was fighting for our family. But really, I was fighting for us, you and me. We're the family that matters." Josh smiled, his eyes shining. "We always were, Mom. We always will be." As I hugged my son, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. Miriam and Mike had tried to break us, but they'd only made us stronger. In the end, love, real, unconditional love, had triumphed over greed and manipulation. And as I looked at Josh, I knew that was the greatest victory of all. We need you back home. Things are falling apart without you. Grace nodded in agreement. Honestly, Emily, I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. We all get tired sometimes. I stared at them, shocked by their callousness. But before I could respond, Margaret stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. How dare you? She hissed. Your wife, your sister-in-law, is lying in a hospital bed, and all you can think about is your own convenience? Scott and Grace looked taken aback, clearly not used to being challenged. Now listen here, Scott began, but Margaret cut him off. No, you listen. This ends now. Emily is coming home with me when she's discharged. You two can figure out how to manage on your own for a change. As Scott and Grace sputtered in protest, I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. For the first time in so long, I wasn't alone in this fight. I looked at my mother, then back at Scott and Grace. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. She's right, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I'm done being your doormat. It's time for things to change. The look of shock on their faces would have been comical if the situation wasn't so serious. As they stormed out of the room, hurling threats and insults, I realized the real battle was just beginning. But with my mother by my side, I finally felt ready to fight. The day I was discharged from the hospital felt like the first day of a new life. With Margaret by my side, I packed my bags and left without a word to Scott or Grace. Their absence spoke volumes about where I stood in their priorities. As we drove to my mother's house, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. What about Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling. Margaret squeezed my hand. We'll get her, sweetheart, one step at a time. Over the next few days, I focused on regaining my strength, while Margaret helped me strategize. We knew confronting Scott and Grace wouldn't be easy, but we never anticipated the bombshell that was about to drop. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emily, it's Leonard, your old boss. We need to talk. It's important. My heart raced as I dialed his number. Leonard? What's going on? His voice was grave. Emily, I've heard some disturbing things about Scott and Grace's behavior at work. I think you need to know. What Leonard revealed next left me reeling. Apparently, Scott and Grace had been spreading malicious rumors about me at their workplace, painting me as unstable and attention-seeking. They'd used my illness as an excuse for their own poor performance and frequent absences. I'm so sorry, Emily, Leonard said. I had no idea things had gotten this bad for you. Tears streamed down my face as I hung up. The betrayal cut deep, but it also ignited a fire within me. No more playing the victim. Mom, I called out, my voice steadier than it had been in years. We need to act now. Together, we crafted a plan. With Leonard's help, we compiled evidence of Scott and Grace's misconduct, including emails and witness statements. Then we contacted their company's HR department. The response was swift and decisive. Within days, both Scott and Grace were suspended pending an investigation. The news spread quickly, and suddenly, my phone was buzzing with messages of support from old colleagues and friends. But the real test came when Scott showed up at Margaret's house, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted as I opened the door. "You're ruining everything." I stood my ground, looking him straight in the eye. "No, Scott, you did that all on your own." He tried to push past me, but Margaret appeared, standing tall beside me. "You need to leave, Scott," she said firmly, "unless you want us to call the police." As he stormed off, hurling threats and insults, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I was standing up for myself. But our victory was short-lived. The next day, I received a call from my lawyer. Scott was filing for full custody of Sarah, claiming I was an unfit mother due to my health issues. My world tilted on its axis. The thought of losing Sarah was unbearable. I collapsed onto the couch, my breath coming in short gasps. Margaret sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. "Emily, listen to me. We're not going to let this happen. You're a wonderful mother, and we have proof of Scott's negligence. We'll fight this." I looked up at her, drawing strength from her unwavering support. "You're right," I said, wiping away my tears. "I've come too far to give up now." In that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of our lives forever. I wasn't just going to fight for custody. I was going to expose Scott and Grace for who they truly were. I picked up my phone and dialed Leonard's number. Leonard, it's Emily. I need your help one more time. It's time to tell our story. As I hung up, I felt a mix of fear and determination. The road ahead would be tough, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up for every person who'd ever been silenced or taken for granted. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to fight. And this time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. The day of the custody hearing arrived with a suffocating tension. As I sat in the courthouse waiting room, my hands trembled despite Margaret's reassuring presence beside me. Scott and Grace hadn't arrived yet, but their absence only heightened my anxiety. "You've got this, Emily," Margaret whispered, squeezing my hand. "Remember, we have the truth on our side." I nodded, trying to draw strength from her words. Just then, the doors burst open and Scott strode in with Grace close behind. Their faces were masks of cold determination, and my heart sank at the sight. "Emily," Scott sneered, his voice dripping with disdain, "I hope you're ready to say goodbye to Sarah. No judge in their right mind would grant custody to someone as unstable as you." Before I could respond, Grace chimed in. "Really, Emily, this whole charade is pathetic. Just give up now and save everyone the trouble." I felt my resolve wavering under their cruel words, but Margaret stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. "That's enough, both of you. You should be ashamed of yourselves." Scott opened his mouth to retort, but was interrupted by a familiar voice behind us. I couldn't agree more. We all turned to see Leonard standing there, a portfolio tucked under his arm and a determined expression on his face. "Leonard?" Scott sputtered, his composure cracking. "What are you doing here?" Leonard stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "I'm here to make sure the truth comes out, Scott. All of it." The color drained from Scott and Grace's faces as Leonard began to speak. He detailed their workplace misconduct, the lies they'd spread about me, and the evidence he'd gathered of their neglect and emotional abuse. "I have sworn statements from colleagues," Leonard continued, his voice steady and clear. "They all attest to Scott and Grace's behavior and the toll it took on Emily, not to mention the records of Emily's medical condition, directly resulting from the stress they put her under." Scott's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this," he shouted, lunging towards Leonard. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. I saw Scott's fist flying towards Leonard's face, heard Margaret's gasp of shock, and felt a surge of adrenaline course through my body. Without thinking, I stepped between them, my hand shooting up to catch Scott's wrist mid-air. "Stop!" I commanded, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Scott stared at me, shock and confusion replacing his anger. "This ends now," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "I'm not your punching bag anymore, Scott. I'm not your maid, or your scapegoat, or your doormat. I'm a person, a mother, and I deserve respect." I turned to face the stunned onlookers, including our lawyer and the court officials who had rushed in at the commotion. "This is who they really are," I declared, gesturing to Scott and Grace. "Bullies who resort to violence when they don't get their way. Is this really who you think should have custody of a child?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, people began to nod. I saw looks of sympathy and understanding replace the doubt and skepticism that had been there before. As security guards approached to escort Scott and Grace out, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained and vulnerable. But as I looked around at the supportive faces of Margaret, Leonard, and even strangers who had witnessed the scene, I realized something profound. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found my voice, and people were finally listening. As we were called into the courtroom, Margaret squeezed my hand one last time. "You did it, Emily," she whispered. "No matter what happens now, you've already won." I took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I truly believed I could win. The courtroom felt like a battlefield as I took the stand. Scott's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in a crisp suit, approached with a predatory smile. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You claim my client has been neglectful, yet you willingly quit your job to care for his mother. Wasn't that your choice?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. "It was a decision we made together," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Scott promised to support me. He didn't. The lawyer's smile tightened. And yet you never sought employment again. Isn't it true that you became dependent on my client? I felt a flash of anger. I was caring for his mother, our daughter, and managing our home. That is work, even if it's unpaid. As the questioning continued, I could see Scott and Grace whispering to each other, smug smiles on their faces. But I refused to let them intimidate me. I recounted every broken promise, every dismissive comment, every moment I felt invisible in my own home. When it was our turn, Leonard took the stand. He presented emails, performance reviews, and witness statements that painted a damning picture of Scott and Grace's behavior at work and their lies about me. Your Honor, Leonard concluded, his voice firm, Emily Thompson is not only a capable and loving mother, but also a victim of prolonged emotional abuse and neglect. The judge's expression was unreadable as she called for a recess. As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt a mix of hope and terror. Had we done enough? In the hallway, Scott cornered me, his face twisted with rage. You think you've won? He hissed. I'll make sure you never see Sarah again. You're nothing without me, Emily. Nothing. I stood my ground, even as my heart raced. You're wrong, Scott. I'm everything I need to be, with or without you. Just then, Margaret appeared at my side, her presence a shield against Scott's venom. Step away from my daughter, she warned, her voice low and dangerous. As Scott retreated, I felt a surge of gratitude for my mother's unwavering support. But the moment was short-lived as we were called back into the courtroom. The judge's decision felt like it took an eternity. With each passing second, my anxiety grew. What if she didn't believe me? What if I lost Sarah? In the matter of custody, the judge began, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom, I find in favor of the plaintiff, Emily Thompson. The world seemed to stop. I heard Margaret's gasp of joy, saw Scott's face contort in disbelief, but it all felt distant, unreal. Furthermore, the judge continued, given the evidence presented, I'm granting Mrs. Thompson's petition for divorce on grounds of emotional cruelty. Mr. Thompson will pay alimony and child support as outlined in the settlement proposal. As the reality of the judge's words sank in, I felt a tidal wave of emotions threaten to overwhelm me. Relief, joy, vindication, but also a deep, aching sadness for the life I had lost and the years I could never get back. Outside the courtroom, as reporters clamored for statements and Scott and Grace skulked away in defeat, I turned to Margaret and Leonard. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't have done this without you. Margaret pulled me into a fierce hug. You did this, Emily. You found your strength. Leonard nodded, smiling warmly. You've got a bright future ahead, Emily, and if you ever want to return to work, there's a place for you at the company. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt like I was stepping into a new world. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. I had my daughter, my freedom, and a chance to rediscover who Emily Thompson really was. The battle was over, but my journey was just beginning. And this time I was ready to face whatever came next, on my own terms. 6 months after the divorce, I stood in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at me. Gone were the dark circles under my eyes and the perpetual look of exhaustion. In their place was a spark of life I hadn't seen in years. Mommy, are you ready? Sarah called from the living room, her voice filled with excitement. I smiled, adjusting my blouse one last time. Coming, sweetie. As we drove to Sarah's first day of kindergarten, I marveled at how much had changed. With the settlement from the divorce, I'd been able to buy a small house for us, close to my mother and in a good school district. I'd even started working part-time at Leonard's company, slowly rebuilding my career. Dropping Sarah off at school, I felt a pang of emotion. Have a great day, honey, I said, hugging her tight. Mommy loves you. As I watched her skip into the classroom, I realized how far we'd both come. No longer was she the timid child afraid of her father's mood swings. She was blossoming, free from the tension that had once filled our home. Returning home, I found a familiar car parked in my driveway. My heart sank as I saw Scott leaning against it, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Emily, he said as I approached, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Can we talk? I hesitated, then nodded, leading him to the porch. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Scott began, and I'm sorry For everything, I was a terrible husband and father. I took you for granted, and I see that now. I listened, my emotions a swirling mix of anger, sadness, and a tiny flicker of the love we once shared. I've changed, he continued, hope creeping into his voice. I've been going to therapy, working on myself. I want us to try again, for Sarah's sake, and for ours. For a moment, I was tempted. The idea of a whole family, of the life I'd once dreamed of, dangled tantalizingly before me. But then I remembered. The lonely nights, the constant criticism, the feeling of invisibility. I remembered the strength it took to stand up for myself, to build this new life. No, Scott, I said firmly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I'm glad you're working on yourself, truly, but we can't go back. I've moved on, and so should you. His face fell, a mix of disappointment and anger flashing in his eyes. For a second, I saw the old Scott, the one who would lash out when he didn't get his way. But instead, he nodded slowly. I understand. I hope someday you can forgive me. As I watched him drive away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The last tie to my old life had been severed, and I was truly free. That evening, as Sarah and I sat at our little dining table, eating dinner and giggling over her stories from school, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. Mommy, Sarah said suddenly, her little face serious. Are you happy now? I looked at her, this beautiful child who had been my anchor through the storm, and felt tears prick my eyes. Yes, sweetheart, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. Mommy is very happy. Later, as I tucked Sarah into bed, I thought about the journey we'd been on. The pain, the struggle, the moments of despair, but also the triumph, the rediscovery of my strength, and the unbreakable bond I'd formed with my daughter. I realized then that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, a chance to write a new story, one where I was the author of my own happiness. As I closed Sarah's bedroom door, I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. For the challenges that had shaped me, for the people who had supported me, and for the strength I'd found within myself. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. Why are you still in bed, Claire? Do something useful for once. Jared's voice cut through the morning quiet like a hammer striking metal. I groaned and turned over. I'm on doctor's orders to rest, Jared. I just made breakfast for us. Again with the excuses, he snapped. Pancakes again? I wanted omelets today. Where's your respect for my preferences? You never mentioned wanting omelets. It doesn't matter. I'm going to the diner. Eat your pathetic pancakes alone. I heard the door slam behind him as he stormed out. I sat up, rubbing my temples. My back ached, and my belly felt heavy with the weight of our unborn child. His words lingered, sharp and biting. Breakfast had always been simple. It was one of the few things I still enjoyed before the day's chaos began. It wasn't always like this. When I first told Jared about the pregnancy, he was over the moon, buying baby clothes and painting the nursery. But somewhere along the line, his excitement wilted, replaced by disdain and indifference. I pushed myself up from the bed and shuffled to the kitchen, looking at the plate of pancakes cooling on the counter. Picking up a fork, I half-heartedly nibbled on one, the taste bland and empty. My phone buzzed next to the plate, and I saw a new message from Megan, Jared's sister. How are you holding up? She had written. I hesitated before typing back. Managing. Jared's being difficult again. Her reply was swift. I'm coming over later. We need to talk. A sense of relief washed over me. Though Jared might be behaving like a different person, Megan had always been supportive. I carried my breakfast to the living room and plopped down on the couch. Reaching for the remote, I turned on the TV for company, something to drown out the silence of the empty house. An infomercial droned on about weight loss supplements, but my mind drifted, recollecting the last few months. Jared's erratic behavior, his late nights without explanation, and how he'd become a stranger sharing my home. When had things gotten so bad? 2 hours passed, and there was a knock at the door. Megan stepped in, her eyes scanning the room with concern. Hey, she said, sitting down beside me. What's going on? I sighed, feeling the weight of my situation pressing down on me. He's getting more intolerable every day. Everything I do is wrong. I can't keep up with his demands. Megan's jaw tightened. I'm worried about you. You don't deserve this. Have you thought about what you're going to do? I placed my hand on my belly, feeling a slight flutter from the baby. I have to think about her now. I can't take much more of this. Megan nodded, her expression serious. You know I'll help you in any way I can, right? Thank you, Megan. I don't know what I'd do without you. Just then, the front door swung open and Jared walked in, looking annoyed to see Megan there. So, what's this little meeting about? He scoffed. Nothing you'd care about, Jared, Megan shot back. Jared glared at her, then turned to me. And you? Are you going to sit around all day, or will you finally do something useful? I felt a surge of determination I hadn't felt in a long time. I'm already doing something useful by taking care of our child and myself. If you can't respect that, then maybe you should reconsider your priorities. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he grabbed his keys and walked out again, leaving behind a tense silence. Megan placed a hand on my shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Claire. Just remember that. I nodded, feeling a little bit of that strength seeping in. This was just the beginning, but I knew I had to start standing up for myself and my baby. The breaking point was here, and with it, a chance to take back my life. You're not coming in with me? I asked, glancing at Jared as we parked at the doctor's office. He shook his head, barely looking up from his phone. I've got calls to make. You'll be fine on your own. I sighed and stepped out of the car, my hand instinctively resting on my growing belly. Inside the clinic, the nurse greeted me warmly and led me to the examination room. Minutes later, Dr. Patel entered, her smile reassuring. How are we feeling today, Claire? She asked, checking my chart. I forced a smile. A bit tired, but otherwise okay. We'll do an ultrasound today, see how the little one is doing, she said, prepping the equipment. As the image of our baby appeared on the screen, I felt a rush of emotions, excitement, worry, and a flicker of hope that maybe seeing this would reignite some semblance of care in Jared. It's a girl, Dr. Patel announced, beaming. Congratulations, Claire. A girl. My heart swelled with love and fear for my daughter's future. Would Jared be happy? I thanked Dr. Patel and collected the photos of the ultrasound. On the drive back, I couldn't wait to share the news with Jared. Maybe this would change things. Jared, guess what? I said, sliding into the car and waving the photos. We're having a girl. His expression didn't change. He glanced at the photos and then back at the road. A girl? Great. My heart sank. You don't seem excited. Jared shrugged. I was hoping for a son, to carry on the family name, teach him things. I stared at him, stunned by his apathy. Does it matter? She's our child. Whatever, he muttered. Can we just get home? The drive was silent, each mile deepening the rift between us. Back at the house, I carefully placed the ultrasound photos on the fridge, but Jared didn't even glance at them. Later that evening, I set the table for dinner, trying to push aside the nagging feeling of disappointment. Jared was glued to his laptop, barely acknowledging my presence. Come eat, Jared, I called out, trying to keep my tone light. He grunted, not moving an inch. I'm busy. The meal remained untouched, and I ate alone, the chair opposite me glaringly empty. Just as I was about to clear the dishes, Jared finally spoke. You need to understand, Claire, he said, not looking up. This baby thing isn't what I signed up for. Not like this. Not like this, I echoed, anger and hurt bubbling up. What do you mean, Jared? I wanted a son. Someone who could, never mind. He shut his laptop with a snap and stood up. I'm going out, don't wait up. The door slammed shut, and I was left in the emptiness of the house, feeling more alone than ever. I touched the ultrasound photo on the fridge, tracing the tiny outline of our daughter. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the house silent except for the occasional car passing by. I realized that Jared was slipping further away with each passing day. His disappointment in having a daughter was just another crack in our already fractured relationship. I couldn't let this continue. For my own sake, and for my daughter's future, I would have to find a way to protect her, even if it meant confronting the harsh realities of our marriage. Determination replaced the despair as I resolved to find a way forward, no matter what it took. I was setting up for a family barbecue when Jared walked in, looking disheveled. I glanced up from the skewers I was preparing. You're home early. Yeah, about that. He scratched his head, avoiding my eyes. I quit my job. My heart skipped a beat. The irony was sharp. Here we were celebrating family, while ours was crumbling. You what? I couldn't take it anymore, he said, shrugging. I'll find something better. Pretending everything's fine won't put food on the table, Jared. What about our expenses? The baby? I said I'll find something better, Claire. Just get off my back, he snapped. Megan and her boyfriend arrived moments later, filling the room with forced cheer. I put on my best smile and directed everyone outside. As we settled into the backyard, I couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Megan's boyfriend, Dave, handed me a glass of lemonade. You okay? You seem a bit off. I'm fine, I lied, my eyes darting to Jared, who was already nursing his third beer in silence. Megan caught my glance and pulled me aside. What's going on? He quit his job. Her eyes widened. Without discussing it, what's his plan? He doesn't have one, I whispered, trying to control my frustration. I'm stuck. Listen, she said, her voice soft but firm. You and the baby come first. You can't let him drag you down. I nodded, her words echoing in my mind. While back at the table, Jared was ranting to Dave about former colleagues, oblivious to the tension between Megan and me. Those idiots didn't appreciate my talents, he slurred. I'll show them. They'll regret it. Dave glanced at me, unsure of how to respond. Yeah, I'm sure things will work out. After the guests left, Jared stumbled into the house. I cleaned up the mess, the day's events swirling in my mind. Would this new version of Jared ever go back to who he was? As I loaded the last dish into the dishwasher, the front door opened and Jared lurched in. I'm tired, he muttered, heading to the bedroom. I finished cleaning up and followed, the silence between us thicker than ever. He was already snoring when I crawled into bed, my mind racing with worry about our future. The next few weeks were a blur of Jared's increasing absences and my solo trips to the grocery store, juggling our shrinking finances. One evening, he came back home later than usual, disheveled and visibly agitated. Where have you been, Jared? I asked, trying to stay calm. Out, he said, brushing past me. You can't just leave without saying anything. We need to talk. Talk? There's nothing to talk about. I stared at him, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. We're having a baby soon? Did you forget? He scoffed. You worry about that. I'm tired of this conversation. His words cut deep. As he stomped off to the bedroom, I sat in the living room, the baby kicking inside me. I realized I couldn't rely on him anymore. I would have to be the strong one for our child's sake, even if it meant facing this journey alone. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter in Jared's sloppy handwriting. Gone to clear my head. Don't wait up. I crumpled the paper, feeling an anger I'd never known before. His irresponsibility was no longer just frustrating, it was endangering our future. I picked up the phone and called Megan. I need help. Jared's gone again. She sighed on the other end. I'm coming over. We need to make a plan. I hung up, determination solidifying in my chest. This had to end. For my baby. For me. The once sparkling promise of our future together had dimmed to a cold, harsh reality. I wasn't going to let him destroy what I had left. I sat on Megan's couch, cradling a cup of tea. She looked at me with concern. You're not alone in this, Claire. We'll figure it out. Thanks, Megan. I don't know how much more I can take. Megan's eyes softened. I've been meaning to tell you something. Jared has always struggled with responsibility. Even growing up, he was always in trouble, always the one making excuses. And I thought it was just a phase, I replied, feeling the weight of her words. But this is different. We're about to have a baby. He quit his job without even talking to me. Megan sighed. It's worse than you know. He's been gambling, Claire. He lost a lot of money last week. My heart sank. Gambling? Why didn't he tell me? He's too proud to admit he's failing, and he's been hiding things from you, things you deserve to know. I put down my cup, feeling a surge of anger. I'm tired of his lies. I need to start preparing for the baby and stop focusing on him. Megan nodded. You're right. We need to find a way to secure your future. Have you thought about opening a separate bank account? I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I'll do that, and I need to talk to a lawyer. We can find someone good, Megan assured me. Meanwhile, you should stay with us. It's safer. I hesitated, then agreed. Okay, just for a while. The next day, I visited a lawyer, Sarah Johnson, who came highly recommended by Megan. Sitting in her office, I recounted the events of the past few months. Sarah listened intently. You have options, Claire. First, we can protect your assets. Second, we need to document everything. Keep a record of his absences, his erratic behavior, everything. Can we get full custody? I asked, my voice trembling. We can fight for it, Sarah assured me. But you must be prepared. Jared will likely contest it. I'm ready, I said, feeling a newfound resolve. After leaving Sarah's office, I headed back to Megan's apartment. Jared's car was parked outside. Unexpected. My pulse quickened as I reached door. Inside, Jared was pacing, Megan standing nearby, looking tense. What's going on? I asked, stepping in. Jared whirled around, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. Where the hell have you been, Claire? I met with a lawyer, I said, standing my ground. A lawyer? He scoffed, eyes narrowing. What are you planning, Claire? I'm planning to protect our daughter, I replied, my voice steady. And myself. You're not taking her away from me, he growled, stepping forward. Megan stepped between us. Back off, Jared. This is on you. He laughed bitterly. Of course you'd side with her. You never supported me. Because you never gave me a reason to, Megan shot back. Claire's doing what's best for her and the baby. Maybe you should start thinking about that. Jared's face turned crimson, but he didn't say another word. Instead, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I turned to Megan, my heart pounding. Thank you. You did great, she said, pulling me into a hug. We'll get through this. Jared's outburst only solidified my resolve. I wasn't backing down. For my daughter and for myself, I was ready to fight. No more letting Jared's actions dictate our lives. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I felt stronger knowing I had Megan and Sarah by my side. The storm was far from over, but I was more determined than ever to come out stronger on the other side. I sat in the quiet of Megan's apartment, feeling the growing emptiness of our old home. My phone buzzed, an incoming call from Megan. Claire, I need to talk to you. Can you come over? Sure. Is everything okay? Just come over. It's important. I hung up, feeling a knot in my stomach. Something was wrong. I rushed to Megan's place, my fears intensifying with every step. When I arrived, Megan's worried expression met me at the door. Come in, Claire, she said, her voice low. I followed her to the living room, where she handed me her phone, displaying a series of photos. Jared and a young woman, their intimacy unmistakable. My heart plummeted. Who is she? I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Her name's Lena, Megan replied, her eyes filled with sympathy. I caught them together. The photos felt like a punch to the gut. I can't believe this, I said, my voice trembling. He's been betraying us all along. Megan put a comforting hand on my arm. You should confront him. You deserve to know the truth. I nodded, wiping away angry tears. I will. Later that evening, Jared burst in through the doorway, reeking of alcohol and smugness. Had a good day? He sneered, his expression indifferent as usual. Who's Lena, Jared? I asked, unable to hold back. He froze, then laughed mockingly. Does it even matter? Our marriage has been over for a long time, Claire. You've been cheating on me while I carry your child? My voice broke, anger mingled with heartbreak. Look, Claire, he said, his tone cold. I want a divorce. Lena and I are moving on. I'll give you some money, but that's it. You and the kid can fend for yourselves. You're a coward, I said, stepping closer, my voice more confident than I felt. If you want a divorce, fine, but I'm not taking any of your scraps. I'm taking you to court. Jared's eyes widened momentarily, then he scoffed. Good luck with that. I'll see to it that you get nothing. He turned and walked out, leaving me to collapse onto the couch, overwhelmed by the reality of his betrayal. But amidst the sorrow, a fierce determination took root. I wasn't going to let him destroy our lives. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah's number. Sarah, it's Claire. I need to file for divorce. Jared's been cheating, and he's demanding a pittance to start a new life with his affair partner. Get all the evidence you can, Claire, Sarah responded firmly. We'll fight him every step of the way. I hung up, my hand shaking slightly. Megan sat beside me, her presence grounding. You did the right thing, Claire. You will come out of this stronger. The days following were a whirlwind. Collecting evidence, meeting with Sarah, and preparing for the impending battle. Jared's arrogance fueled my resolve. He continued his charade, believing he would walk away unscathed. But I had different plans. Megan and I worked tirelessly, documenting Jared's every move. When the day came to face him in court, I felt ready. Jared was vile, but I had found a strength within me I hadn't known existed. As we stood in the courtroom, I glanced at Megan and Sarah, their supportive nods, a testament to our solidarity. Jared's smug demeanor faltered as the evidence stacked against him. For the first time, He looked genuinely afraid. I tightened my grip on the stack of documents in my hand, feeling the weight of justice on my side. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring a future for my daughter. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for everything we deserved. Sarah's office was bustling with activity when I arrived. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a reassuring smile. "Claire, we're ready to go over the strategy. Are you prepared?" "Yes," I replied, my eyes meeting hers. "Let's do this." We sat down at the conference table, papers spread out in front of us. Sarah laid out the plan meticulously, documenting Jared's neglect, his affair, and his financial irresponsibility. "We have a strong case," she said confidently. "Our goal is full custody and a substantial alimony. Jared won't know what hit him." I nodded, feeling bolstered by her confidence. We reviewed the evidence once more. Photos of Jared and Lena, his erratic financial records, and affidavits from Megan and others who had witnessed his behavior. This wasn't just a fight. It was a battle for justice. The day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse loomed large as I walked in, feeling the weight of what was to come. Jared was already there, looking more polished than usual, but his eyes held a nervous edge. We filed into the courtroom, the judge presiding with an air of stern authority. Jared's lawyer began, trying to paint a picture of a struggling man who deserved leniency. "Your Honor," Sarah's voice cut through the room, "the evidence is clear. Jared Harper has been negligent, unfaithful, and financially irresponsible. We are requesting full custody of Claire's daughter and appropriate alimony to support her as she prepares for her new life." Jared's lawyer scoffed. "Mr. Harper is a dedicated father. He deserves joint custody and is willing to provide some alimony." Sarah stood firm. "Dedicated? Really? Let's go over the facts. Jared has been absent for a significant part of the pregnancy, spending time and money on extramarital affairs. He quit his job with no notice and has not contributed adequately to household expenses." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Jared shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Harper, would you like to speak?" I stood, hands trembling but voice steady. "Your Honor, I've worked hard to keep our family together, but I can't do it alone anymore. My husband has shown time and again that he isn't committed to this family. I want to provide a stable, loving home for my daughter." Jared shot me a glare. "Lies! She's turning everyone against me." The judge silenced him with a look. "Mr. Harper, you'll have your turn." We presented our evidence. Jared's cell phone records, bank statements, and photos of him with Lena. Megan's testimony was heartfelt, painting a picture of a man who had lost his way and a sister-in-law who was trying to pick up the pieces. Jared's lawyer tried to counter, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's expression grew stern as the facts piled up. After hours of testimonies and cross-examinations, the judge took a brief recess. When she returned, her decision was swift and clear. "Mrs. Harper, you are granted full custody of your daughter. Mr. Harper, you will provide adequate alimony and child support." Jared's face went white. "This isn't fair," he shouted, but no one paid him any mind. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Court is adjourned." As we left the courtroom, Sarah put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Claire. Justice is on your side." I glanced back at Jared, his face twisted with anger and fear. He had thought he could get away with everything, but now he faced the consequences of his actions. Megan hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you. You stood up for yourself and for your daughter." Tears welled up in my eyes, but they were tears of relief. "Thank you, Megan. I couldn't have done it without you." We walked out of the courthouse, the sun shining brightly. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while I felt hopeful. My daughter and I would start anew, leaving the past behind. Jared's downfall was just beginning, but my journey to rebuilding my life had already begun. Jared's face was plastered all over the papers. "Local man exposed, infidelity and financial failure lead to downfall." My phone buzzed non-stop with notifications and messages, some from mutual friends, others from strangers who had picked up on our story. Megan sat beside me, shaking her head. "He brought this on himself." A knock on the door interrupted our conversation. It was Sarah. "Just came from the judge's chambers. Jared's demands for reduced alimony have been denied. He's in deep debt, Claire." "I never wished for this, but he has to face the consequences." Sarah nodded. "And his legal troubles are only beginning." His part-time jobs found out about the court ruling and fired him. He's practically blacklisted. Employers don't take kindly to public shaming. Just then, my phone rang. Jared's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, but Sarah encouraged me to answer. "What do you want, Jared?" His voice was laced with desperation. "Claire, please. The media is killing me. I've lost everything. Can't we talk this through?" I could almost hear the pleading in his voice. "You made your choices. This is your consequence." "Please, Claire, I can't find work. Lena left me. I need help." "Megan and I will discuss this with Sarah," I said, looking at Sarah for confirmation. "But I can't promise anything. You need to understand the gravity of what you've done." I understand. Thank you," he croaked before the line went dead. Megan gave me a skeptical look. "Are you sure about this?" "He's at rock bottom. Maybe now he'll learn." Later that evening, Megan and I met with Sarah at her apartment. We reviewed Jared's desperate request. "Let's keep a record of this conversation," Sarah said, setting her phone to record. Then she dialed Jared. "Jared, it's Sarah. We're willing to listen, but you need to be honest." Jared's voice trembled through the speaker. "I am. I'm trying to turn things around." "Turnaround starts with responsibility," Sarah said sternly. "Admit to your errors, find solutions, and we might consider adjusting the stipulations." "I'll do whatever it takes," Jared replied hastily. "Then get clean," Megan added. "No more gambling, no more lies. Show us you can be reliable." "I will, I promise," he said, sounding like a man clutching his last hope. The next few weeks were revealing. Jared struggled to find even odd jobs. Megan and I occasionally spotted him around town looking disheveled and downtrodden. His proclamations of reform were met with skepticism by those who knew his past. One evening, as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed with a new message. Jared's text read, "I've enrolled in a gambling support group. First session today." I showed Megan the message. "Think he means it?" "We'll see. Actions speak louder than words." Jared's actions began to show promise. He attended support group meetings regularly and even picked up volunteer work at a community center. Sarah kept track, cautiously optimistic. "He's making an effort," she said during one of our meetups, "but it's a long road." A month later, Jared requested a face-to-face meeting. With Sarah's guidance, we agreed, but kept it public at a nearby cafe. As he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked more composed, yet there was still a shadow of his old self. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sitting down. "I know I don't deserve it." "What do you want, Jared?" Sarah asked, keeping the conversation on track. "I need to apologize. I was wrong. About everything. I want you to see I'm trying to change for the better, especially for our daughter," he said, his eyes earnest for once. I nodded. "Prove it, Jared. Words aren't enough." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn sobriety chip. 1 month clean. Small steps, but I'm committed. Megan gave me a reassuring nod. "We'll keep an eye on you. Don't slip." The meeting ended with a sense of cautious hope. Jared had a long way to regain trust, but the first steps had been taken. For me and my daughter, a new chapter waited, filled with healing and cautious optimism. I sat at Megan's dining table, sorting through the stack of documents Sarah had prepared. The custody papers were finalized, and I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Mommy, my little girl Hannah, toddled over, tugging at my shirt. Her innocent eyes were a beacon of hope in the midst of our turbulent life. I scooped her up, planting a kiss on her forehead. "Hey, sweetie, Mommy's almost done. Go play with Aunt Megan for a while." Megan led Hannah to the living room, setting her down with a pile of toys. "She's growing up so fast." "She is," I said, feeling the bittersweet nature of our situation. Just then my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "I've got the restraining order paperwork ready. We need your signature." I placed the phone down and sighed. As much as Jared's recent efforts to change were promising, I couldn't take any chances with Hannah's safety. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, her expression serious. "Claire, we need to talk. Jared's been making some disturbing comments in his support group." I frowned, letting her in. "What kind of comments?" Sarah glanced around, ensuring Hannah was out of earshot. "He said if he couldn't have custody, he'd take drastic measures. We need to act fast." Fear rippled through me. "Do you think he'd try to take her?" "We can't rule it out. We need to ensure you and Hannah are safe." As we discussed the plan, another knock sounded. I opened the door cautiously to see Jared standing there, looking agitated. "I need to see Hannah," he demanded. "You can't just show up unannounced, Jared," I said, blocking his view of the inside. "I'm her father," he growled. "I have rights." "Not without proper arrangements," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Leave now, or I'll call the police." Jared's eyes flashed with anger, but he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. "Stay alert, Claire," Sarah warned. "He's unpredictable." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. Around midnight, the sound of a window creaking open set my heart racing. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. A figure appeared in the hallway. "Jared, I just want to see her," he whispered harshly. "Get out now, Jared," I yelled, clutching Hannah close to me. Within minutes, the police arrived. Officer Mark Anderson, the responding officer, assessed the situation quickly. "Mr. Harper, you're under arrest for violating the restraining order." Jared struggled as they cuffed him, shouting, "I just wanted to see my daughter." As they led him away, Hannah stirred in my arms, her innocent eyes opening briefly. The sight of the police lights outside startled her, and she began to cry softly. Megan rushed in, wrapping us both in her arms. "It's over, Claire. He can't hurt you anymore." The next morning, Sarah came by with the final documentation for the restraining order. "This ensures he can't come near you or Hannah. If he tries anything again, there will be severe consequences." I signed the papers with a shaking hand, but a sense of finality and relief washed over me. Megan set down a plate of breakfast in front of me. "Here's to new beginnings. You and Hannah deserve peace." I smiled, looking at my daughter now playing with her toys, unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. "Thank you, Megan, for everything." "Always," she said, squeezing my shoulder. That evening, Megan and I sat together, reflecting on the past few months. "It's been a tough journey," she said, "but look how far you've come. I couldn't have done it alone, and now it's a fresh start for us." Looking at Hannah, peacefully sleeping, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Jared's toxicity was no longer a shadow over our lives. With the legal battles behind us, it was time to rebuild and move forward, fostering a life of love and safety for my daughter. Finally, we were free to create our future, unburdened by the past.